Hi, class. Good morning. My topic is going to be what factors are considered in New York to hold a defendant regarding risk of flight or another offense. So this is pretty much covering bail reform. So I'm just quickly going to discuss what is New York's bail reform law. Currently, it eliminates money for bail for most misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies. Those accused of these crimes are either freed without restrictions while their case plays out or released under certain conditions like electric monitoring. So I just discussed quickly, primary sources are books and websites that compromise the formal written statements of laws issued by government entities. The law in this context includes everything from the state statutes to a city's ordinances to case laws published by a court. Secondary sources are defined as materials that discuss, explain, analyze, and critique the law. They discuss the law, but are not the law itself. Some of these sources include law journals, encyclopedias, and treatises are a great place to start your legal research. So for my secondary sources, I used Georgetown. So I'm going to go to this website. And there is multiple books based on the laws as well as the civil procedure, which includes bail reform. They are able to use, I particularly use this one, An Illustrated Guide to Civil Procedure by Michael Allen and Michael Finch. So I'm just going to click on this. And it kind of goes over exactly what the bail reform is and why it's important, and you can export it, you can use the link, you can even print it. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my second source, which is a book that I found particularly interesting that discusses the comprehensive look at bail reform in America's criminal justice system. So this particular book talks about, you could also read it. They have a print version, they have an email version, and you can borrow it at your local library. Okay. And I'm going to go to this one, which is a Google Scholar book. They are actually able to read online. So here's the full text version. It's another article that discusses solitary confinement and the entire corrections procedure. As a previous corrections officer, I chose this topic because I found it very interesting. And this particular article discusses incarceration harms health, and specifically on Rikers Island jail inmates. And it discusses how bail reform is very much needed, not only on Rikers Island, but in our entire criminal justice system. Okay, and then I chose this article that I thought was very interesting. It talks about New York's bail reform and how it has actually increased crime. Not only does this article provide statistics, but it also has reliable information on how the bail reform actually works. And if they don't take monetary value from the offenders, what they're actually doing in order to make sure that they do attend court and that there is consequences and reparations paid. So this discusses all the different statistics in New York suburbs, upstate New York City, because each one of those areas in New York have sort of a different crime pattern. Okay. Then here's another article I chose that I found very interesting. It was more like a blog post, and it's titled The Facts on Bail Reform and Crime Rates in New York State. So not only was I focused on New York City, but I was also curious about New York State because they are the same state, yet they're so very different. And this assesses the cash bail in most cases, not only cash bail, but what other techniques they're able to use without charging money. So this also discusses the electrical monitoring I spoke about in my topic. And it also talks about how there's no evidence linking bail reform to the 2020/2021 crime increase. So I chose articles that kind of argued with one another whether bail reform actually did play a role in the crime increase or whether it did not. Okay, I also chose this, which discusses New York State Defender Association. So this is part of the Bar Association, and it talks about bail reform implementation, and it includes information on the 2019 bail reform law, which took effect January 1st, 2020, and has since been amended with the 2020 state budget. So up until recently, New York, as well as multiple other states within the US, were still collecting bail money for offenders who committed crimes, whether that be a misdemeanor or a violent crime. And as of recently of 2019, New York has pretty much abolished the idea of taking money as a form of bail, and they're going into other measures such as the electrical monitoring, house arrest, things of that nature. And for my primary sources, I do have quite a few. I found a few case laws that I found were very interesting that actually discuss the principle of bail reform, and these specific cases are from years and years ago, but I still think they pretty much play the same role today in 2022. And in this case, it talked about someone being arrested and charged with a crime of grand larceny in the first degree. They stole a large amount of money and their bail was set for $25, and whether or not this was constitutionally approved or not. So that's what this case law talks about. I also had a site for Congress that I wanted to briefly mention that I thought was very interesting. So this is the opposing the elimination of cash bail. So this is whether or not we should actually eliminate cash bail or not, or if we want to keep it in place. So this is an argument with two attorneys who discuss whether or not they agree with the laws upheld in New York and whether or not still remaining bail would still be applicable, or if we should move on to something else. Another primary source I talked about was this one, which is another opinion on a court case regarding bail reform and whether or not we should still implement it or if we should go with something else. And this talks about how they forfeited upon the defendant's record of non-appearance at the trial date due to them not paying bail. So overall, those are my primary and secondary sources of my main topic, which is what factors are considered in New York to hold a defendant regarding risk of flight of another offense. So those are how you access the books, articles, statutes, laws, all that information and details regarding New York bail reform and whether or not there are other ways to hold a defendant as a paralegal or as an attorney.